This is the Zionism that, in its more liberal formulations, is even happy, perhaps, to talk about Israel, maybe, relinquishing the occupied territories, as long as the Nakba, or catastrophe of 1948, the fate of the refugees of 1948, and the status of Israel's second-class Palestinian citizens, that is, the constitutive racism of Israel as a state, as indicated by its, for example, its violations of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, is not brought into the discussion. What is at work here, then, is not a first-order kind of denial and erasure, but rather a second-order kind. The form of Zionist identity, worldview, subjectivity that emerges here is premised on the act of denying that there has been a denial, erasing the fact that an erasure has taken place. Rather than denying the rights of the Palestinians, it denies that their rights have been denied. The form of identity that emerges from this second-order denial is then not premised on repression, but rather on the repression of repression. This second-order denial is exactly what the Museum of Tolerance in Jerusalem is all about. The museum is to be built for people like this. And it is perfectly fitting, then, not simply that such a museum should be built on top of an ethnically cleansed graveyard, but that those who will eventually gather to celebrate its opening, and those who will visit it in the years afterwards, will have no idea of the profundity of the historical, material, and psychical layers of denial on which they stand. Thank you.
I'll keep my comments very, very brief because people, I guess, want to ask questions. One of the things that struck me during Sari's talk tonight was, on the one hand, how familiar it is and yet how unfamiliar it is at the same time. And it just reminded me today to just read a very, very quick quote from Edward Said, who's actually related to Sari, the late Edward Said, who died in 2003. And when one reads what he says, it reminds me very much of what Sari said tonight, and that is that as much as things change, they stay remarkably the same, just worse, in a way. The levels of delusion that exist to actually convince people that what is happening is actually not happening. In other words, a perversion of truth. I hate to use the word Orwellian, but that's actually the only appropriate term I can use. I'll read you a very quick quote from Edward Said from 2002, which is from the London Review of Books. The main difference between 1982 and 2002 is that the Palestinians now being victimised and besieged are in Palestinian territories that were occupied in 1967, and they have remained there despite the ravages of the occupation and the destruction of the economy and the whole civilian infrastructure of collective life. The main similarity is, of course, the disproportional means used to do it. For example, the hundreds of tanks and bulldozers used to enter towns and villages like Jenin, or refugee camps like Jenin's, to kill, vandalise, prevent ambulances and first aid workers from helping cut off water and electricity and so on. All the support of the US. And one of the things that struck me listening to Sari this evening about this Museum of So-Called Tolerance is that I would ask anyone in this audience to say whether they've read anything about that story in our media at all. I certainly haven't. So let me just firstly thank Sari again and for a wonderful speech. Thank you. And we'd love to take questions. There are 2 mics, I'm told, on either side. And as one always should say, definitely, questions, not statements. And to keep it short, but to the point. I can't actually see anybody stand up at all. I'm happy to ask the first question. Would that be the best? Okay. Let me ask a generic question, but a necessary one. There's about to be this evening, US time, a meeting, or supposed meeting, between Barack Obama, Netanyahu and Mahmoud Abbas in New York on the sidelines of the upcoming UN conference. Give us a sense, although I guess you can write a book about it, which you have, where you think the Obama administration might be going in the so-called peace process, if we can call it that.
That's a very important question, Anthony. Thank you. It seems, I'm sorry to say that it seems to me that the Obama administration, actually you said it very well in your introductory remarks, which is that there are lots of pretty speeches but very little substance. And the big question is whether President Obama wants to spend the political capital that it'll take to push through anything. And to me, it seems inconceivable that he wants to do that, whether for reasons of the Zionist lobby in Washington, or because he has so many other things on his agenda at this point that Palestine sort of drops to the bottom or near the bottom or not anywhere near the top. So what we see in the meeting, I think it's instructive, the meeting of Obama and Abbas and Netanyahu is Netanyahu, first of all, who completely refuses to countenance any kind of compromise whatsoever, fundamentally speaking, not rhetorically, fundamentally speaking. So on the one hand. On the other hand, Obama, who, as I said, doesn't want to expend political capital to bring pressure to bear on Israel. And then Abbas, who is basically kind of useless because he has no cards and no pressure and no leverage and no nothing behind him. So in a situation like that, you know, it's sort of inevitable what the meeting is going to produce. It's going to produce essentially one more photo op. And we have to ask ourselves also, why is it that there are periodically these attempts to revive the Middle East peace process, like in Annapolis in 2007? Why can't we just say, look, it's this way of trying to resolve the conflict is not going to work. We need another way of trying to resolve it, and one that takes peace and justice and rights and equality into full account.
Thanks. I'm a bit scared of Anthony's descriptions, so I better go to question. My question is, a bunch of indigenous people who have been playing their mom's cradle, schoolyard and backyard, and they have been confronted by a bunch of people who are the holder of passport from God, and they're saying, God gave us the land, you people get out of here, and they're conducting ethnic cleansing, genocide, everything else. So how come the indigenous people, the victims are the terrorists, the perpetrator of the terrorism are not terrorists? And second part of the question is, of course, regarding fact. I got a couple of 100 years old maps, probably available to everyone, but media is not publishing them. They are not telling us what was the 98% genuine offer of Ehud Barak to Yasser Arafat at Camp David on today. They are not giving us the boundary of Israel. Is it the current 78% old Palestine, or all the way from Palestine to Greece? Where is it? Where is the boundary? Where it stops? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. It seems to me, I mean, you're right, that it's a spectacular, it's just I don't understand it. I mean, I read newspapers, and I don't know how they work particularly, but I read them, or watch the TV news or listen to the radio. But I don't understand why it is, for example, that so little has been made of this museum, for example. I mean, I don't know how many of you knew about it. You can put your hands up if you've heard about the museum before. It's very few people who know about this project. Very few people know about all kinds of things, both in the occupied territories and in Israel itself. I mean, for example, I had no idea when I started writing my book that there's no such thing as civil marriage inside Israel, which is something that has, it's of massive significance, because it means that somebody who's Jewish can't marry somebody who's not Jewish, legally speaking, inside Israel. So there are things that we just don't know. Or about the peace process itself. It's true, we get this sort of mantra. Ehud Barak offered Arafat 95% or whatever it is of the West Bank. And it's just, factually, it's not true. First of all, there was no such offer. There was no offer at all. And second of all, in fact, what was being talked about was offering sort of a kind of rhetorical sovereignty over the territory, but maintaining the Israeli army presence and the colonies and the bypass roads and so on. So there's the ways in which language is used, to me, completely, it's mind-boggling. And the question then is, why do newspaper journalists do that? Is it something that they want to do? Is it something they're told to do? Is it something that their editors fear to meddle with? Is it a sense of self-policing and self-monitoring and self-censorship? I honestly don't know what the answer to those questions are. But it's true that the media does, in general, the mainstream media does a very poor job of conveying the realities that it ought to be conveying to an informed global audience.
Thanks for your talk. Just before my question, I'm going to make a small comment because it's kind of interesting. That another correlation between the situation with the Museum of Tolerance and the situation in Silwan is that in the digging underneath of the suburb of Silwan for the City of David ruins, they actually uncovered more than 200 bodies, Palestinian Muslim bodies, that were discarded in that process. And at the same time, in the tours that are given through the City of David, the history that's presented of the situation is has a huge leap in the chronology from 3000 BC to the 1800s, because there is no history between those times. just as those bodies didn't actually exist and they've disappeared now. My question is just in regards to the Museum of Tolerance.